thinking about community, it's something I think you said this before we started recording, and I think about this a lot, that schools, for better or worse, and we can argue that maybe in the long run, maybe this isn't a good thing for society overall, but I think the way a lot of communities in this country work right now, schools are one of the things that bind a community, right?
Right.
That's what keeps people together. Like, how do you get to know your neighbors? I don't know, maybe you say hi to them outside, but if you have kids anywhere in the ballpark the same age, you start seeing those people at stuff. You all root for the same football team. You do this kind of thing. So outside of even the education piece, schools are important in building and maintaining a sense of community. Thinking about you're a Berryville, you're a Clarke County guy, like you are a community member, right? And entrenched. When you think about how the school functions in that capacity, do you think there's things that we could do with the school, not educationally, just thinking about like community events, like we got the parades, we got this kind of stuff. You're running for office at the county level. Are there ways that we can leverage the schools better to better support the community? Because I think one of people's concerns is, as there's been a little more development, people are worried that they're losing some of that sense of community and small town feel. And I don't know if that's true, but I do think when you have a small high school that everybody rallies around, that is a point of congregation. Like, is that something that is important to you or that we could use?
Yeah. Well, I wish I could speak to like sort of the current state of the high school. I don't know how, close these classes are. The school's, probably almost twice the size as it was when I was there, getting on, 20 years ago, more, even. So quite some time ago. And it was even smaller then, obviously. So, I can't speak to how close knit sort of the current, high school, even middle school, elementary school communities are. But speaking to my own experience, which I have to think is still relevant, because in reality, even though the school is now the high school is still now twice the size, and there are certainly more people in town and more coming, it's still small. I mean, there's comparatively, even in its own bubble, it's small. And that's what a lot of people like about it. So speaking to my own experience, I mean, as early as, elementary school, I mean, Friday night was football games, which they used to play down at Johnson Williams. In the winter, it was the basketball games at the high school, now the old high school. But I mean, my friends and I, when we were out, on the playground at recess, we'd be pretending that we were guys named Josh Kerhobert, who happened to be Mike Hobert's son, Steve Sipe and Patrick Bartlett, Chris Myers, Dan Broy. We just, pretend that we were them, playing for the Eagles. This was in elementary school, and then we get to Johnson Williams, and, at that time, these guys are winning like, district championships, and it was such a cool environment. And that's just the sports, side of it, which is primarily, my experience. I couldn't wait to, put on the Cougars uniform and play basketball at the middle school. Couldn't wait to put on the Eagles jersey and play baseball and golf, which is what I played in high school. And it was just it was what I expected, but better than I expected in a lot of ways. But also I didn't appreciate it until I was gone, if any of that makes sense. What I mean by that, it was a great rush in the moment. Certainly some of my best memories of high school are, the big games, the big crowds, the cheers, everybody knows your name. They see you on the street. Hey, great game the other night, all that kind of stuff. That's, irreplaceable, and hard to replicate this day and age, I think, for a lot of our youth. So that was a very special experience as it was happening. And then, that is amplified by things like the homecoming parade and stuff like that. And it seems to me like just sort of my in retrospective memory of it maybe is that those things used to be more frequent. They used to be more well attended. Maybe that was, skewed by the perception of youth. I don't know. Having young kids, mine are just about 2 and 4, they'll be involved in that community here shortly, but they're not there yet. So I guess I'm eager to see, sort of what that community is like as I re-engage with it at a different level. Whether, to speak to your question, whether there's more that can be done, I think the short answer right now is I don't know, because as much as I support the teams and go to the football games, take the kids to the football games now and see my old classmates who now have kids of their own, and all that's great. And I know the coaches still, and some of them are kids that I played sports with, or were assistant coaches on teams when I was there. So I know those guys, and they are certainly better entrenched in what the current vibe of the high school scene is, and then the high school community scene is, and even the middle school scene is. So I should probably ask them, hey, what do you guys think could be done to make us a little bit more close knit? But I don't know that we have a problem with that. So it might be creating sort of an issue where there is none, so to speak.
But no, I sort of ask it because working in a school now, but now working in a school where I live 45 minutes away from it, like I see what kids think the school is in the community. And I think I have a better sense of what the school actually is in the community. But I also know that people who have no contact with the school can sometimes forget that it's there until some kid did something stupid or they made too much noise or whatever else. And I think in terms of trying to secure, say, those community partnerships, like you're talking about for internships, or, if it's a funding issue, anything like that, the more contact that people have, the more likely they are to support, because they feel connected to it. And when a school is not of a focal point, or at least a visual sort of constant presence in the community, then sometimes it's harder to get people on board with those kinds of things because they can forget that it's there. And so it's not necessarily you have to do more or less. And like I said, I'm in the same deal. Our kids are basically the same age. I got I just turned 2 and my son's 4. And so, we're about to get into it. But right now my perceptions are very different because I didn't grow up here. My kids aren't in it yet. So I just sort of catch these little glimpses. And if I wasn't a teacher, I probably wouldn't even be paying the little bit of attention that I do, but it's always a way to sort of maintain that sense of community. And it certainly makes it easier for funding or for community purposes when the school is at the center of some of these things.
Right. Well, let me just say that one of my favorite times of year is always about this time of year, when the homecoming parade does happen and you have all the local businesses, deck all their stuff out, and there's Go Eagles, written in orange and blue on the windows, and banners flying. And, that I just love that time. I don't know if they still do this ritual, but we used to, ride in the float. Of course, I was on the sports teams and stuff. So we'd ride on the floats, up Main Street and finish up at the high school. And there'd be a big old bonfire that night. And then, the next day is the game. And then, you got your dance and all that kind of stuff. And it was just felt like a very communal experience. And I hope it still is for kids these days. I at some level, I kind of find it hard to relate to kids these days. And I think that's kind of why and I say kids, I mean high school age kids.
It's because we're getting old.
Yeah. In theory, I guess I'll be able to relate a little bit better as my kids age, but at least I hope so. But that's part of the reason I decided not to become a teacher is even though I was only, I don't know, call it 5 or 6 years removed from high school at the time that I went back to sub, it couldn't have been more different with kids just already looking down at their phones and texting and it's just a different world than the one I left. I didn't even have a cell phone until my sophomore year in college. Not that
I got my first one freshman year. We're like saddling two worlds in terms of how some of that felt. And having kids growing up, I think will reintroduce some of the stuff. But
I look forward to that. I really do. I'm really eager to, and it's unfortunate that COVID happened when it did and the way it did, because Sadie was getting ready. I don't know about your kids, but Sadie was getting ready to go into the pre-K program.
Yep. My son Will was going to do that.
Yep. And she was so psyched to get in there. And
Will was like, I get to ride a school bus. Like it was, we had a sad talk every morning for 2 weeks, and we had to tell him he wasn't going to get to ride the school bus for at least another year.
I know, man. It's kind of devastated me. And like, I I was a Cooley kid, so I didn't go to Boyce, but I was going to root for the Cardinals and maybe get some Boyce Cardinals gear and wear it with school pride. That's always been a big thing for me. Like the irony being that like I follow UVA sports and like I've got some UVA gear, but I'm not like a diehard UVA fan. I was thrilled when they won the basketball championship, last year or 2 years ago, and then won the baseball championship a couple years before that. Like that was great. But I'm not a diehard UVA fan. I think it speaks to my, connectivity with that community. I never felt connected to Charlottesville, to UVA necessarily. Like, sure, I support them. I love sports. I like the idea of supporting, where you went, your local things, but nothing will ever compare to me to the idea of supporting, the Eagles, and rooting them on. And I'll, wear my Eagles gear with pride around town, because I still feel that, level of connectivity, even though now I'm, close to 2 decades removed from it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and it's a good place to do it too. Cause in a community this size, you can have all the storefronts. I mean, one, there is a downtown, right. And you have a store. Like I think about where I work in Ashburn. I think about friends who work in Fairfax County or in closer to Washington, DC. And you have so many high schools so close together with overlapping, sort of boundaries that,
right.
Very few businesses, unless they, their kids went to the school or something, they don't put anything up because they're catering to 3 different high school communities in their business. Yep. Here where it's all one, you really do get that sort of unifying effect, which is really nice, but maybe isn't easy to duplicate in bigger places and things like that.